Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, November 24th, 2024, and we are pleased to bring you a conversation about FDA reform and the effort to declare aging to be a disease that can be fought with medicine, science, and technology. So we are going to discuss this effort with our distinguished panel. We have our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia. We have our Director of Longevity Outreach.
Hi, Gennady. How are you?
Doing well. We are live. We are doing introductions. So we have our Director of Scholarship, Dan Elton, and we have our member from Texas who is also quite active in the Texas Transhumanist Party, Alan Crowley. And our special guest today is Alex Afshar from the organization Age Reversal Unity, which is working to create a world without suffering through the power of age reversal. Its goal is to help the FDA change the definition of aging to a disease so that aging can be cured and humanity can avoid further suffering. It seeks to bring together education, awareness, and community support for the mission to cure aging. So today we're going to discuss a special effort from Age Reversal Unity to put forward a citizen's petition to declare aging a disease. And Alex is here with us to talk about Age Reversal Unity and some of its recent efforts in this regard. So Alex, welcome, and please tell us more. Let's see. It looks like Alex has a bit of a slow connection. So what I'm going to do is put the petition on the stage here. And this is a petition that has been posted to the site regulations.gov. And this is a site where anybody can put forward a proposal to an agency of the US federal government. And that agency then is obligated to consider the petition. So this petition from Age Reversal Unity requests that the FDA take three actions. First, to initiate proceedings to reclassify aging from a natural process to a disease for the purposes of regulation and research. Second, review and consider the scientific and medical evidence presented in support of this reclassification. And third, amend the relevant FDA policies and regulations to reflect the reclassification of aging as a disease. So this is very much an effort that is aligned with the US Transhumanist Party and our mission. Indeed, the Transhumanist Bill of Rights explicitly holds that aging should be declared a disease. And we have the document itself for the citizen's petition. So it's possible to see more information about it, to download it, and to view the petition as well. We're going to set it up here to be viewed. And in the meantime, I do encourage everybody to go on the site at regulations.gov and sign the petition. Put in your own comment. There are 100 comments thus far. The more comments there are, the more likely the FDA is to respond. So right now, this petition, which was submitted on May 7th, 2024, it was acknowledged on May 22nd, states, currently there is no regulation classifying aging as a disease. And furthermore, it states, as the proposal, the FDA shall promulgate a new regulation that defines aging as a disease for the purposes of research, treatment, and prevention. And then these are the three requests that were also in the title of the petition. And then the rest of the document, it's just a 2-page document, gives the reasoning for declaring aging a disease. First, it says aging is the underlying cause of chronic diseases. Aging is the primary risk factor for a multitude of chronic diseases, including heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and diabetes. The progressive deterioration of cellular function and physiological processes associated with aging significantly increases the risk of developing these debilitating conditions. And the current healthcare model focuses on treating these diseases once they manifest, neglecting the root cause, which is aging itself. The scientific basis for reclassification is identified as the following. Extensive research has identified 9 hallmarks of aging. Some will now say there are 13 hallmarks of aging, including cellular senescence, genomic instability, and telomere shortening. These hallmarks are targetable cellular processes that contribute to age-related decline. Studies on model organisms demonstrate the feasibility of intervening in these hallmarks of aging, extending healthy lifespans. And the growing body of knowledge on the biology of aging is paving the way for developing therapies that target the root causes of age-related diseases. So what are the benefits of redefining aging as a disease? Increased research funding for interventions aimed at slowing or preventing age-related decline, improved access to preventative measures targeting the biology of aging, and a shift in healthcare focus from treating age-related diseases reactively to promoting healthy aging proactively. What are some of the potential drawbacks? This is a section that every FDA petition requires, so to address any possible drawbacks, and they say the FDA should establish clear guidelines to differentiate normal aging from pathological aging processes, and streamlined pathways for therapies targeting aging mechanisms should be implemented to address potential regulatory hurdles. But I would say this section is just there to fulfill that requirement of including potential drawbacks. Then another requirement, and there are multiple requirements for these kinds of petitions, is to have a statement of environmental impact, and there's not likely to be any. It says the development of interventions targeting aging might have future environmental impacts, but those would be assessed during the development and approval process of each specific therapy. So just the declaration of aging as a disease isn't going to have an environmental impact. And then an economic impact statement may be submitted following review of the petition. Of course, we would say the economic impact would be dramatically positive because people whose aging is reversed could work, could contribute to economic growth and prosperity instead of consuming so many resources during the last years of their lives, essentially receiving last-ditch medical treatments that often don't work. And then we just have the certification of the petition and contact information for age reversal unity. So it's a fairly concise petition, and I think it very much aligns with many of the positions taken by the US Transhumanist Party. So I would say let's open this up for discussion among our panelists while Alex is still trying to connect. Who has some thoughts about the petition?
Well, the thing that stands out, well, first of all, I think everyone involved should be applauded, and the thing that stands out is, I think I don't see any mention of the need for surrogate endpoints or biomarkers of aging, and we, in addition to I think what Aubrey Gray has said recently is that the FDA some of the officials are actually open to the idea of having age reversal or slowing aging as an indication for a therapeutic or drug. But what's missing is a biomarker that that they are on board with that could be used in a clinical trial, because obviously you're not going to use lifespan as your endpoint for clinical trials, because that would just take way too long if you had to wait for the people in your trial to die. So the biomarkers are essential, and the biomarkers of aging, and I think if that was mentioned, it might sort of complete the picture for the FDA. And I think it's just such an essential component that it honestly should be mentioned. But obviously I support the initiative even as it is. And another thing I want to mention is that Trump just announced his pick for the FDA commissioner, which I was hoping he was going to select Balaji Srinivasan or Jim O'Neill or Joseph Golfall. Those are my big picks, and I wrote about that on my blog. But in any case, Trump ended up going with Marty Makary. And I just saw an interesting video clip that was shared online on Twitter today, where Marty Makary actually believes that age reversal is possible, which is huge. That is huge, because that is not the sort of thing you typically hear from conventional physicians and medical establishment type folks. So there's an interesting clip going around from Marty Makary. Maybe we can play it at some point. And so with Marty Makary coming in, we may have an opening for some real reforms at the FDA, including recognizing aging as a disease and getting clinical endpoints and biomarkers of aging established. So it's a very exciting time. I know a lot of people are, not a big fan of Trump and all that, but we have this in terms of FDA reform. This is a very exciting time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you,
So
Dan.
those are my comments, and I put a link to the clip here in our internal chat, so maybe we can review it at some point during this in Salon.
Yes, we will
Dan,
see
I
what
just
we
started
can do.
messing around on Twitter. I saw your post about Balaji Srinivasan being a possible contender for the FDA. I haven't popped on in a minute. I'm not sure if even someone was selected yet, but I listened to his podcast with Ramakrishnan, and that was pretty good. Hearing about his ideas on what he's like a network state and all that. So I appreciated your Twitter post, man.
Yes, and I've got a blog actually about why Balaji's would be a good FDA commissioner, and he was on Lex Friedman with some, talking brilliantly about the FDA for about an hour. Unfortunately, he's been living in Singapore the last 4 years or so, so I think that's an issue. But he was a finalist in 2016 when Trump was looking for someone. So he was seriously considered in 2016. This time around, he may have been passed over because of the fact he's been living in Singapore. And there's some rumors going around that he revoked his U.S. citizenship. I haven't been able to confirm that, but that may have been an issue. So
seems like a little bit of a rash decision. Is that just to avoid paying income tax, since we're like one of the only countries that taxes on that, even when
I
you're
don't think he did,
there?
but he's been in Singapore. I guess I'm not sure why. I know he's pushing the network state idea, which is the idea of sort of decentralized nation states of sorts. But yeah, I don't know. I think it partly may have been for because of crypto projects he was involved in, and there being less crypto regulation in Singapore, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, you also mentioned what was his name? Golfo. I liked the graphic you posted about the difference between the FDA's mandate, which was originally to promote the public health, and which says, let's see, the administration shall promote the public health by promptly and efficiently reviewing clinical research and taking appropriate action on the marketing of regulated products in a timely manner with response to such products, protect the public health by ensuring that foods are safe, wholesome, sanitary, and properly labeled. Human veterinary drugs are safe and effective. And then there is reasonable assurance of the safety and effectiveness of devices intended for human use. So it's one of those things where it's funny with regulation because they zoned in really hard on the safety and effectiveness. And it's like, now we even have to prove so much of the effectiveness when really the whole points of promptly and efficiently were just like thrown out the window. Like, promptly, efficiently.
Yeah.
What does that mean? 10 years. So
I could get into that.
You should.
Do we have, yeah. Yeah, another thing, so Jim O'Neill wants to roll back the FDA back to how it was in 1962, when it was safety testing only. Right now, from my perspective, and same thing with Mary Rubart, who we've interviewed on the show. So from my perspective, that's a little bit too extreme. What Joseph Golfo talks about is how even under the current mandate, they've gone way past it. So it used to be just safety and a reasonable assurance of effectiveness, but now the FDA wants new drugs to be better than existing drugs. And while that may sound good, the problem is that when the FDA, the effectiveness of drugs is determined, it's determined for a large sample of people, right? So basically, the FDA says it has to be better for everyone on average, but ignores the fact that a drug may not be better on average, but it may actually be better for certain people. So essentially, they've ruled out the possibility of personalized medicine in a lot of ways, because now they've made it a lot harder to get a drug on the market because they have this ultra high level of standard for effectiveness, where it literally has to be better than everything on the market in a general for all groups. So it's extremely high bar. Plus, the FDA now is pushing for low cost as well, which was not in the original mandate. So that's what, and there's a lot of obvious problems with that too. So that's what Joseph Golfo talks about. He's not as serious, he's not as extreme of a reformer as some of the other people, but I think that, overall he was, he was my best pick. He was kind of my favorite pick. Because he also is very much in favor of, right to try, and he has a lot of very detailed reform proposals that really, like in his book, Innovation Breakdown, that get into a lot of detail about how the committees work, and it gets a little bit.
Do you recall any of them? Can you think of maybe one or even two proposals that he has? What are his ideas of what would be helpful in terms of that? And also, I wanted to state, as regards to with the drugs, I think that's kind of funny because it seems to leave out the fact that you could have a new drug that's equally effective as other ones, and then that's not getting approved. on top of that, I've had every doctor that I've had has said, look, we're not there yet, but the future is really going to be personalized medicine. Like, we're talking about looking at your genes, getting on sequencing.com, spending not 23andMe, but spending a little extra, getting yourself sequenced with a real sequencing program, and then finding out, okay, do I have issues with any of the specific drugs I'm taking?
Right.
And I can very easily see a situation where someone has, I mean, right now, I think really the only thing that they test for in terms of drug efficacy is the CYP34A pathway that has to do with liver metabolism. But other things that end up affecting drug efficacy that are tailored to the individual's person's genes are just kind of thrown out the window as, oh, that's too random. So they just take that huge sample size and, say it has to be better for everyone, but it's like everybody's different,
Right. So, yeah. So this is the book, which it's a very, if you're interested really into the FDA, this is a really interesting book. If you don't want to read the whole book, I have a review on my blog about it. But he's got a section at the end here, the Medical Innovation Manifesto, and it's very detailed. I mean, he's talking about some reform proposals I've never heard. Like he's saying, have the ombudsman. He goes into extreme detail, like have the ombudsman report to the commissioner. He says today each center has a separate ombudsman. Grievance resolution is not effective when the arbiter is part of the team. So he's going into extreme detail, and he's also saying, just to pick another, he's got like probably about 100 different specific actions that could be taken to improve the FDA. And I'll just read out one or two more. Maybe he says, he says, end the transparency initiative. Our agency should be honest or open. So that's one thing he talked about, is the FDA has a transparency initiative, which is kind of a joke. And also, the point of needing transparency is a really good one, because right now the way things are done are kind of arbitrary. We don't really know, and so people in industry who are trying to figure out what they should invest in, they don't really know how the FDA is going to respond, because there's no transparency in their decision making processes, and so, for instance, we never learned why the AstraZeneca vaccine was not approved, because there's zero transparency. And you can do freedom of information requests, but they're very time consuming and expensive, and they take like 2 years. And so, I don't think anybody really knows why the AstraZeneca vaccine was not approved or authorized. Anyway, he's got a lot of specific things here. He's talking about, he's saying, establish an innovation impact index, replace redundant initiatives with a continuous improvement program. I mean, I don't even know what that means, but
make everything better. That's his initiative.
Joseph Galpo's thought very carefully about how to improve the FDA. So, he's my, he would be my number one, but I think that I understand why Trump probably went with Marty Makary, because Marty Makary has had a much more public presence on the cable news channels. Like, he's been on Fox News a lot, so he's sort of a known person that people know and respect, because he was right about a lot of the stuff during COVID. So during COVID, Marty Makary was saying that the FDA should accelerate their approval of vaccines. And then later he was saying that they should accelerate their approval of Merck's antiviral medication, which I have a video clip I posted about that. But he was also saying that we should do first doses first. Remember, first doses first? All the scientists and economists like Alex Tabrock were saying that people should, because there's a limited supply of vaccines, let's give everyone one dose first and then move to second doses. Because the first dose, the effect of the first dose is way bigger than the effect of the second dose. It's just very logical. In the UK, they did first doses first, but for some reason, our completely incompetent healthcare system, bureaucracy and FDA didn't want to do first doses first. And the FDA had some lame excuse saying, well, the clinical trial was for 2 doses. So we can't deviate from what the clinical trial used, even though the clinical trial had data about, there was some data available about 1 dose versus 2 doses. It's an example where you get these bureaucrats that they follow the rules so closely that it ruins stuff, right? They're the
I can interject and talk about another.
He was right about a lot of stuff during the pandemic. He also was against the mask mandates.
There was
so that's that's going to win a lot of support from his base. And I think he was probably right about a lot of that. Like, probably the mask mandates in some cases were overblown or unnecessary, like overreach. But regardless, he's very good. He's also pro-vaccine. He's not an anti-vaxxer like RFK Jr. So, yeah. So I think this is exciting. I think it remains to be seen what exactly he's going to focus on. Unfortunately, there's I don't know. I think with RFK Jr. As his boss, the focus may be more on these other issues that he's concerned about, like food, quote unquote contaminants in the food supply and stuff like that. But hopefully we can, let's Gennady, if you don't mind, I think it might be useful for the viewers if we just watch the video, if that's possible, from that Alex Colville posted.
The video is linked here, and anybody can go to the X page. The reason why I'm hesitant to show it is because it's a clip from Fox News, and Fox might tag our stream with a copyright strike if we are to show it. So I would recommend, though, those who are interested, it's less than a minute long, so go see this post on X after the salon. But Zach, you were going to say something. I think your connection just lagged, but try again.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Example of the FDA following the rules too specifically, right? So we have our veterans. They go to war. Some of them get PTSD, horrible situation. They started looking at a medicine to be able to help them through therapy called MDMA, commonly known in drug culture as ecstasy. But it's like methyldeoxymethamphetamine. So they give the sufferers of PTSD this, and then it sort of brings up like some happiness and some emotions. And then obviously in a safe setting with the therapist, they're supposed to talk through their issues and be able to help release them. And there's been some good evidence for it. They did a trial. The FDA reviewed it. They had a certain committee that they pay, or I'm not sure if they pay, but there's a committee that makes decisions that they advise to the FDA, like an advisory committee. And their complaint about the trial was that people who did not receive the dose of MDMA, aka the placebo group, probably knew that they did not receive the actual drug. and therefore the study had some faults. It's like, huh, you know, you're in a group. Do you know if you took MDMA or do you not? And it's sort of a thing that you can't really blind that well, but it's so obvious that a person would know if they took that drug that it's like, why would they use that as an example of something that is an issue for why to approve the trial? It's like, it's, you know, a specific rule that they're following the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law in a sense. And I had, yeah, that just set me off.
Yeah, Zach, that's a really great example of this inability to inflexibility, right? And what they really need is they need a whole new pathway for psychedelics, right? Psychedelic medicine.
Absolutely, because it's something that has been able to help so many people, and it ends up getting kind of sullied in the sense of, you know, people use it in not, I mean, you know, prescribed ways. I think recreational drugs are recreational, obviously, but they can have powerful therapeutic uses. And to be able to just kind of write them off because it's like, oh, someone might have fun while they're doing it is kind of unacceptable. And I mean, I do think we need to talk about doing it safely, but it's one of those things where someone isn't.
And the other thing about the MDMA thing, if I recall correctly, the scientific review panel actually voted in favor. I think it was a small margin, but they voted in favor. So the scientific, I believe that the panel was in favor of it, but then the FDA rejected it. And that's a thing that people don't understand necessarily, that these scientific panels don't actually have any power or authority. They just advise the FDA. So, yeah. So
I want your opinion on something, Dan. Tell me about, so in Vivek Ramaswamy's post where he was talking with Balaji, they mentioned, you know, DOGE, this Department of Governmental Efficiency. Do you think that's going to be good for longevity or bad for longevity? Like, I can see it either way, like becoming more efficient with the FDA and cutting out some regulation that's stopping stuff, or I can also see it being a negative, like taking some things that, I don't know, may have been like funding or towards certain departments, like for the NIA or the NIH.
Yeah.
And slashing that.
I'm not aware of like wasted money at the FDA. If anything, like the FDA probably needs more resources so they can hire more staff. Like Balaji's actually talked about how like he wanted to actually have these different centers of excellence and like more staff and stuff. So I don't think there's, you know, I don't know if I think if anything, the FDA might need more resources than getting stuff cut. There are probably general reforms like around procurement. Like it can be hard to purchase from certain companies who aren't like government approved, even though those companies might be cheaper. Like, you know, like if you just want to buy like a computer, like you can't just buy it from some random person. It has to be like an approved vendor. So there's probably some ways they can reform that. I'm hoping that the DOGE, well, I'm very excited about DOGE, and I'm hoping they're going to mainly go after the Defense Department, because I think that's where
they did mention that in one of their like 9 Twitter posts or whatever.
And there was actually an article recently that the DoD failed an audit. They've been failing audits the past several years. They've been Lockheed Martin is selling them soap dispensers that cost like $200. You know, there's there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. There's the famous $100 hammer and all that. So I'm hoping they're going to really go after the Defense Department. And Cenk Uygur, who's a more left-wing guy, he offered to work there because he's excited about the possibility of cutting some of the waste at the Defense Department. And there was an exchange on Twitter where Cenk Uygur said, "Hey, I'd love to be a part of DOGE. help cut the waste. And Elon said, I'm open to specific ideas. So Elon actually responded to his post. So I'm hoping, it would be really cool if it was like a bipartisan initiative with Cenk Uygur in there.
That would be so cool. Cenk would be a good guy to be in there, I bet.
And,
He's got that kind of fiery, go-get-'em energy,
Right. And obviously very, very smart guy who's been, on thinking about these issues for a long time. So, yeah, I'm very excited about Doge. I don't see it really tying into the FDA, but because and I don't think they're just gonna. What people don't understand is they're not just gonna cut 20% of the budgets across the board. Like people at NIH and elsewhere are kind of freaking out because they're thinking, oh my God, the budget's going to be cut 20% or whatever, 2 trillion total. But they're going to go after specific places where there's a lot of waste and abuse, like the DoD. And they're going to go after certain, like the contractors who, are basically, milking the government for huge amounts of money. That's what they're going to go after. They're not just going to slash things 20% across the board, I don't think.
Dan, you know what I'm interested in? Oh, go ahead, Gennady.
Yeah, there is a bit of a concern, though, that they might instigate mass firings of employees as a way to cut costs. And the problem is when you do that, and the agency still has the same mandate, the work needs to be done somehow. So the employees get replaced by contractors who are much more expensive and over whose work product there's less control. So this is why the Defense Department's budget is so bloated, because it uses a lot of these hyper expensive contractors that charge $700 for a toilet seat or $100 for a hammer. And the reason why they do that is because they have favored relationships with perhaps some of the leadership of these agencies that go into regulatory agencies and into these companies that get federal contracts through a kind of revolving door arrangement. So my concern about Doge is, in the effort to cut costs, they might fire so many employees that they will actually raise costs because these politically connected contractors are going to do more of the work.
Yeah, Gennady, I have to
go
concur
ahead.
on that. I mean, I experienced that firsthand in the military. Would be like large units like Central Command or European Command would balance. Well, here's our personnel budget cost is down, and they would be talking about soldiers, sailors, airmen, right? But their overall personnel expense had gone up because they were hiring contractors at a larger wage, which was a wage large enough to exceed the housing, food, transportation, and those other kind of perks and benefits that soldiers are receiving. Additionally, I think it's not the budget that needs to be reduced. It's the scope of what these agencies are doing. I think until you start focusing that and just leveling off the cost, right? Just step away from an increase every year, and it's a de facto decrease in budget, but start reducing the scope of what these agencies are supposed to do. Somebody mentioned it earlier. If the mandate stays the same, but they've got 10% less people, it's harder to do.
Yeah, there's probably certain, there's obviously certain things that aren't really giving much a return to taxpayers. I can't really think of anything at the FDA specifically, but there's a lot of weird research projects that are getting funded that don't seem to have a lot of benefit to cost ratio. And And we're also, and some of these internship programs and other programs where they're basically having foreign students come in and do internships. I'm not really sure necessarily how good those are in terms of what the taxpayers get out of it, because a lot of that is just training people. So I don't know. Yeah, there's it's hard to it's hard to think of anything specific at the FDA. Most of the examples of waste I know of are at DoD and some of these kind of very specific environmentalist programs, to for very obscure pet projects, but yeah, I don't know.
Yes, indeed. And well, Daniel Tweed writes in our chat, isn't the arduous FDA drug approval process in need of drastic reform? And I think it is, but Balaji's point is that could actually be helped by the addition of more staff, because you could have reviewers looking at applications more expeditiously. I know sometimes when an agency is short-staffed, that could lead to longer review times and slower approvals, especially if, as Alan pointed out, the scope of the agency's mission is the same, but they don't have as many people to accomplish those tasks. And then Evan Webb writes in our YouTube chat, there are lots of bases that we do not need that could be closed. One idea that Daniel also has is that accepting Bitcoin at all levels of governance would be a potentially huge efficiency increase. And indeed, in El Salvador, the government of Nayib Bukele has actually implemented Bitcoin as an official state currency. So there is definitely a precedent that can be studied and learned from here. Now, Alan has also in our internal chat recommended streamlining the process for approving drugs by the FDA, and the US Transhumanist Party supports that. We support a model where drugs don't need to pass efficacy testing in order to be available to patients. They could be available to patients, as in Japan, once they've passed safety testing, and then essentially the efficacy data can be gathered in the course of making the drugs available to patients on the market. So we are still trying to get Alex back on, but while we are making that effort, I wanted to highlight a few aspects of the petition so that people can know where to put in their comments. So here is the page where all of the comments are listed, and you can organize them in various ways. I organize them newest to oldest, but you can also go the other way. And it actually takes a few days for the FDA to review any comment that is submitted and publish it here. So you will notice the latest comments here were posted 2 days ago, but if somebody submitted a comment between then and now, it is still under review, but it will probably be posted early next week. But you can see my comment here. As chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, I write in support of this petition for the FDA to promulgate a new regulation that defines aging as a disease for the purposes of research, treatment, and prevention. The Transhumanist Party is an alliance of over 4,600 members who advocate for transcending the flaws and limitations of the human condition through technology and for putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. We champion initiatives and reforms that will improve the human condition for as many people as possible, with as much beneficial impact as possible. Our first core ideal is the pursuit of significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. Without effective ways to address the damage inflicted by biological aging at the cellular and molecular level, such significant life extension would not be possible. Aging greatly increases the probability of each of the disease conditions that are statistically most likely to end an individual's life. However, without the classification of biological aging as an indication that can be targeted by therapies, drugs, or medical devices, many researchers and companies would not see a clear pathway for any such potential treatment to regulatory approval and delivery to patients. Accordingly, much beneficial and life-saving research is likely to be deterred, and many financial resources might never flow into the biomedical rejuvenation field unless the FDA recognizes biological aging as a disease and signals openness to reviewing therapies, drugs, and medical devices that would seek to reverse biological aging directly instead of solely targeting specific disease conditions. The Transhumanist Party urges the FDA to open the way toward revolutionary life-saving medicine, which will greatly extend healthy, productive lifespans of as many Americans as will be alive in time to benefit from these advances. The correct time to classify aging as a disease was decades ago. The next best time is as soon as possible. Over 110,000 people die of causes related to biological aging every day, and every day closer to medically achieved age reversal will mean the opportunity to save such an astonishingly high number of irreplaceable individual human beings. So this comment is now forever published on a government website, regulations.gov, and that can have an impact, and your comment can have an impact as well, and we can get the FDA and other members of the public who read these comments to see more of the transhumanist perspective, to get acclimated to these positions being out there. So I strongly encourage you to post. Again, you can just click here on comment, and it will take you to a form that you can fill out. It's a fairly straightforward process. So now I would welcome any other discussions of the petition. Art Ramon, if you have any thoughts, or Ben.
Yeah, just I'll sign the petition after the salon. We put out the link, did we?
Yes, we did. We did.
Okay.
And it is available here. So you can go to this page specifically to submit comments. And this is the page that's up right now. And click on this blue comment box. If you would like to read our comment in a bit more of an elegant presentation, you can also go to our website here, where the same comment that I just read to you is emphasized. But submit your own comments as well.
Yeah, I'll sign it later and share it on all my social media.
Very good. Ben, any thoughts on the petition?
I was thinking how I might go about writing a comment. I suppose in public health school, we learned about if you can get upstream of all causes of more proximate illness, et cetera, that's a better way to do things. I think in the public health context, we were thinking more like if people are better off financially, education, other such broad realms, that also leads to their health being better. So that was the initial thoughts of how I was going to write my own comment about this, to think about addressing the upstream causes of all the illness, et cetera, that we have, and aging being, what is it, 2/3 of all illness that we can attribute to the causes of aging. So I hope that other people also think of their unique angles that might get the FDA to say, you know, yeah, we should be taking action against aging.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ben, for sharing your thoughts. Dan, go ahead.
And again, we need them to support biomarkers, and I think there should also be a petition to NIH and ARPA-H, which is sort of under NIH, to support age reversal or anti-aging clinical trials. because specifically for drugs that are already on the market that are going to be used off-label. So, for instance, metformin is already on the market. So drug companies aren't. I don't think drug companies will be able to make much money selling metformin for slowing aging or age reversal. But we could have NIH research and do a clinical trial. There is the TAME trial. I wanted to mention the TAME trial because one of the things I heard recently was that the TAME trial right now is one of the only randomized controlled trials being done on slowing aging in humans. Most of the others are in other animals, right? Like dogs, mice, whatever. TAME trial is basically the only one in humans, specifically for general aging. And if I remember correctly, like they did not get the second round of funding. I believe they got some NIH funding, but they did not get all the funding they wanted. And so my understanding is the TAME trial is is way underfunded right now. And that's really a shame. So I think we should have a petition to the FDA to fund this sort of research, and of off-label drugs, and also the kind of research that Aubrey de Grey is doing with looking at the combinations of drugs, right? It's
definitely,
it's really
the multiple mouse
we have to
rejuvenation.
rely
I agree.
on donations for this kind of essential research.
Yes, I completely agree with you on this, on the importance of
Especially
combinatorial studies.
There's a lot of scrutiny on the FDA right now, on the NIH right now, in the wake of allegations of findings of fraud. Right, I've been reading a lot about this huge fraud case at the National Institute of Aging with Eliezer Maslia. I just was reading a lot about it recently, and there's a lot of anger because Alzheimer's affects, I think, 20 million people or something, and this guy was in charge of the neuroscience division at the National Institutes of Aging, so he was overseeing how billions of dollars of funding were being spent towards Alzheimer's, and he was recently there was an investigation that confirmed fraud. Some independent investigators found evidence of fraud in I believe 132 papers. So I wrote about this also, and here's some insider information I'll share with you guys. Not really insider information, but here's some information that you might I want to discuss. It's a little bit off topic, but after NIH completed this, they spent about a year. So what happened was that there was a Science magazine funded a team of forensic investigators to go through all of Eliezer Maslia's papers. He has about 400 papers. I don't think they went through the very old ones, but they went through all his new papers. They found 132 papers with evidence of fraud, mostly image manipulation. And they submitted a dossier to the Office of Research Integrity at HHS. The Office of Research Integrity then requested NIH to do an investigation. They did an investigation, it lasted about 14 months. So finally, they concluded that he did commit fraud, and so NIH released a statement at the end of all this saying he is no longer the head of the neuroscience division at the National Institute of Aging. And he's no longer listed on their website, but he's still in the NIH directory. So if you look at the NIH enterprise directory, which you can find publicly online, and you search for his name, he is still listed in that directory as an employee of NIH. I'll put it in the chat. So I believe, based on this, that he is actually still employed by NIH and still getting a taxpayer-funded salary. And I'm trying to find out more information on this right now to confirm if he's actually employed. But based on the fact that he's still in this directory, it looks like he's still employed, which is, and we've seen this with other major fraud cases recently where there's not as much consequences as there should be. So there's been 4 very high-profile fraud cases in Alzheimer's recently. I wrote a very long blog post about that, and all 4 of those people are still employed. There's been various sanctions, and they've lost certain titles and stuff, but they're all still employed in some regard. So anyway, so the point is, the reason this is potentially relevant is that there's a lot of scrutiny on the National Institutes of Aging right now because of this bombshell case, and a lot of people are looking at how money is being spent there. So, you know, and I think there may be an opening for a broader discussion based on this, and we'll see.
Wait, I missed something. What is the implication of the link that you put there? It just shows a contact of Elijah Bislaya.
Well, it shows he's still in the NIH directory, which implies that he's still an employee of some sort.
But it's possible that
it's very suspicious. All NIH said is that he's no longer the director of the neuroscience division. And then they said, beyond that, NIH does not comment on personnel matters.
It's possible that there is
if he had been fired, you think they would have announced that. So that suggests he has not been fired. He's still a researcher there, which is crazy.
But they may not actually be letting him do research, because it's one thing to have someone officially on staff. It's another thing to have them working on projects. So there may be a disciplinary process, but with these kinds of agencies, due process has to be followed. So they may, for instance, put someone on administrative leave pending an investigation, but it could be paid administrative leave, for example, and they may have the option to contest any of the allegations against them, and that may take a while because they may have rights to a hearing, for instance, or even to appeal a particular determination, depending on the specific process for the agency in question. So I don't think that's necessarily a sign that he is doing something within the NIH. But I do have a concern that scandals like these may put all federally funded research on aging under a microscope, and the effect of that could actually be an attitude of overcaution among those who decide which projects to fund or which projects to continue, because they might be looking at this through a political lens. They might be thinking, well, which of the projects could be accused of wastefulness, reckless spending of taxpayer money by the public, even though with science, of course, there are many research pathways that don't work out. Just because a research project is undertaken and there is perhaps some decent evidence to suggest that it might lead to some promising results doesn't mean that it will, but nonetheless, it's important to go down those pathways and explore them, because a negative result is still valuable for the future progress of science, and that's something that's not commonly understood. People think that a project that fails wasted taxpayer money, just like in academia, because of the publish or perish mentality. There's the idea that if you don't publish some sort of glamorous positive result, then your career shouldn't advance. And as a result, a lot of researchers tend to gravitate toward the low-hanging fruit, the projects they know are going to bring some sort of success, some sort of publishable results. So I do think all of that scrutiny is at least a double-edged sword.
And it is my understanding is, it is very difficult to fire federal employees of that level, and it's kind of by design, because they don't want they want to keep these civil servants around. They don't want them to get fired just because like a new political party is in office and all that. Like, so you may be right, Gennady. You may be right that that there's additional processes that have to play out, and that's why he's still listed as a employee. But I'm really hoping that they'll just take him out, because he should not be receiving any more taxpayer money. Another thing, I did a lot of research on this guy, and his salary was, I believe, the 6th highest salary within NIH. He was his salary was in 2019 was around $400,000, and that was in 2019. So he's probably was making even more recently. And I mean, this is why people commit fraud like this, because they can rise in the ranks of prestige, and they can start commanding these super high salaries. It's just not right. He should not be receiving a penny more at this point. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to share that was I came across during my research was I noticed that Kathy McMorris Rogers has actually commented about the fraud from Eliezer Maslia, and that was interesting because McMorris Rogers, in June, she laid out a framework for, quote, reforming the NIH. And they want to combine a lot of the institutes, which they argue would save money, because they believe there's a lot of administrative redundancies in having all these different institutes. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion about reforming the NIH, combining institutes. Some of the things they propose are make a lot of logical sense. Like, they want to combine, like, for instance, I'm looking at this now. They want to combine the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse with the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Okay, that makes sense. They want to combine, what's another one? They want to combine the National Eye Institute with the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, and the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research. And that will become the National Institute on Neuroscience and Brain Research. Anyway, the other thing they want to do is McMorris Rogers wants to do is she wants to convert the National Institute of Aging to the National Institute on Dementia.
Oh,
right?
That is a horrible proposal. Yes, there is an adjective that I would use if I were less polite to describe that proposal, which is in the name of the National Institute on Dementia, but really it would be a bad event for the transhumanist community, for the longevity community. It would be a visible public defeat because a change in the name would suggest that aging is no longer a priority for research, and that aging is somehow seen as normal, natural, outside the bounds of trying to reverse scientifically, and all they care about is the decline associated with dementia. So it has already been a trope that NIA should stand for the National Institute on Alzheimer's rather than the National Institute on Aging, because so much of the research funding has been dedicated toward Alzheimer's disease research, and indeed toward hypotheses that themselves have been associated with some fraud, or at least some let's say overly optimistic characterization of the data in favor of that hypothesis, the amyloid hypothesis. So billions of dollars have been spent on the amyloid hypothesis regarding Alzheimer's, with essentially no viable drugs or treatments to show for it. And I would say the NIA should diversify its research funding allocation away from Alzheimer's and toward essentially the root causes of aging at the cellular and molecular level, how to identify these aspects of age-related damage and reverse them before they become pathological. But I think I am saying something that many in the transhumanist community understand, and this proposal to rename the National Institute on Aging and redirect its efforts more toward dementia is a step in exactly the wrong direction.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things we're not looking at the actual issue. And so instead of looking at the root cause, which is aging here, we're going all the way down the chain and finding the very last thing and trying to fix that rather than the root cause that's leading up to that and many other issues. It's a similar issue with reforming the FDA in general, how when we have incentives where we're so driven by negative drug events, you know, someone can get fired at the FDA letting something through, that there's no real incentive for them to hurry through drugs that could be life-saving. They only get punished if they get it wrong. There's no mechanism in place that rewards them when they get it right. So we can talk about reforming the FDA, but I think we need to think about human incentives, and we need to think about mechanism. One of the things Balaji talked about was this book, Reputation and Power, where Balaji talked about the FDA's incentive structure, and officials care more about accumulating power and protecting their reputation because they're human, and humans, you know, care about their own livelihood, rather than promoting rational regulation that is in the public interest. It's one of those things where to do what's right, you're punished, but then to maintain your kind of ivory tower that isn't doing things and is holding things back is what's rewarded there. So it's one of those things where incentives matter so much, but we're not looking at the incentives. We're looking at just like with it's a downstream effect. Incentives are incentives are so far upstream of correct behavior. We're not dealing with the right issue.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
and I wrote about that as well. You know, but just to go back to the National Institutes of Aging, I think, you know, there's just a lot of scrutiny on the FDA right now. We see this with Kathy McMorris-Rodgers, and also the stuff around Anthony Fauci and the so-called cover-up of how they funded the gain of function research. And I actually think there's something to that. But there's another thing is so in response to Kathy McMorris-Rodgers' proposal, article, and framework, the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives has proposed what they call the National Institute for Longevity and Aging Research, or NILAR. And they have a petition on their website to support this and push this forward. And so, I think it's, I'm hoping that the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives can be part of the discussion here. They have a white paper on this proposed institute, and I think it's exactly what we need. And in regards to Alzheimer's, like what Zach was just saying, is that Alzheimer's is really probably a consequence of aging, the biological processes of aging. And I think that there's, I think that it has something to do with the immune system. People with weaker immune systems are more likely to get Alzheimer's. So I think the weakening of the immune system due to aging is probably a huge factor in the development of Alzheimer's. So, how much of Alzheimer's is due to aging, I'm not, or whether, I'm not really sure. You could argue that, it also depends sort of how you define aging, because Alzheimer's seems to be the processes of tau and amyloid plaque formation. They seem to occur in everyone to some extent, but at different rates. So the fact it's so universal could suggest that it's part of aging. The thing is that it occurs at vastly different rates between individuals. There's been a lot of research trying to figure out why. There's a gene called APOE, which seems to be a big factor, but they don't really know exactly all the factors. But anyway, I think that you could definitely argue that aging, the biology of aging, the processes that underpin aging are certainly a contributor to Alzheimer's. So curing aging would probably go a very long way. You might need some additional therapeutics specifically targeting, Alzheimer's as well. It's hard to say, but yeah. But I think that there's, like I said, a lot of anger right now, because a lot of people have loved ones with Alzheimer's, and there's just a lot of anger about this fraud case, and rightly so. And so that when you combine that with the criticisms about the Fauci, the criticisms of McMorris Rogers about waste, and other criticisms, like there's a lot of attention on the FDA. So I'm hoping that will ultimately result in something good. Alexei Guzzi, another thing that's on this vein is Alexei Guzzi has this article that went viral on Twitter where he says abolish the NIH. Now, I think that's going way too far, but there needs to be reform in how the NIH funds things. And one of the big points that Alexei Guzzi makes, as well as other people, is that the age, so back in the 50s and 60s when NIH was founded, the average age of people receiving grants was around 30. 35, I believe, 35 or 40. And over time, that age has gone higher and higher. So it's now around 55, 60. So what's happened is that it's harder for, what Alexei Guzzi says is that NIH provides 7 times more funding to scientists 66 years and older, literally retirement age, to those 35 and younger. And so what's happened is that the vast majority, it's very hard for young, talented researchers to compete and get funding. And we know historically that most of the greatest advances of science have been made by young scientists. I mean, almost all the great scientists made their seminal contributions in their 20s and 30s. And because of aging, right? And the cognitive decline starts around age 35. And so we need to, this is a huge problem. So my response to Alexei Guzzi was that we don't want to abolish the NIH, but we want to abolish the way we want to abolish NIH's funding mechanisms. We need to be a whole new system for funding. This current funding system at the NIH, which dominates everything, isn't working, basically. So
Yes.
And Alexei brings up a number of different criticisms of NIH. I won't get into it. But it's just part of this whole growing attention on NIH.
Yes. So the NILAR concept, I think, is a promising one, and it would definitely be superior to the National Institute on Dementia. And this is another petition that people can sign. So this one is from A4LI, the Alliance on Longevity Initiatives, and you can find it here. There are instructions about how to sign it, and I will put up the link to the petition as well. Here it is. No. Here it is. So what it says is on June 14th, 2024, Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers proposed a reform of the National Institutes of Health, aiming to improve clarity and transparency, increase oversight, and eliminate silos within the current structure, what we just discussed. While reform is indeed necessary, the proposal to rename the National Institute on Aging to the National Institute on Dementia threatens to undermine the progress the NIA has made in aging biology over the past 50 years. And A4LI recognizes that longevity and aging research will become a central focus of the NIH as the number of older Americans is expected to rise exponentially. As an organization dedicated to ending the threat of age-related diseases and making longevity medicines accessible and equitable, we are motivated by this reform and are proposing the establishment of a new institute, the National Institute for Longevity and Aging Research, or NILAR. NILAR will increase support for aging biology research and drive innovative solutions that accelerate the translation of scientific breakthroughs into therapies, ultimately benefiting the health and wellness of all. Our outlined proposal was submitted to the Energy and Commerce Committee on August 16th, 2024. In order for NILAR to receive the attention it deserves, we ask you to please demonstrate your support by signing our proposal and sharing this with your network. They've collected 500 signatures already, but they could use some more. And you can also see on this page, there's a more detailed document. It is quite extensive. It's essentially an issue paper. So you can read it after the salon. It's 9 pages long that discusses NILAR and the details of what this institute would be about. And the fact that longevity is in the name would be a step forward. So a lot of this is about the nomenclature. I think the nomenclature will drive the focus of these agencies. And I do agree that the National institutes on health right now have a suboptimal way of allocating funds. I think very much there is this mentality of going for the low-hanging fruit, going for the projects that are very likely to succeed, even if the impact is going to be mild. At least they can say then that they're not wasting taxpayer funds. And as a result, this does reinforce a kind of gerontocracy because they are more inclined to give funds to scientists with an established track record. Those scientists tend to be older, and those scientists may initiate more conservative research projects, not politically conservative, but conservative in terms of the scope of their ambitions, because they know they don't have that long left in their careers and they just want to do something that constitutes an incremental advance. But that's not going to be enough to cure or reverse biological aging. Now, we do have some
Gerontocracy at the NIA. That's kind of
Yes.
ironic.
Yes, indeed. So we do have some comments from our audience. So Art Ramon noted that AI is finding a lot of that fraud. And indeed, AI can read texts and spot patterns, and indeed, sometimes spot outright plagiarism, which has happened before. So most famously, Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard University, was pressured to resign after many instances of plagiarism were found in her past research. And that was done through crowdsourcing and a bit of AI as well. So plagiarists can no longer just bury their plagiarism in some obscure papers and hope that nobody will find the exact citations of the texts that the plagiarists copied, because AI can do that very easily. Please don't plagiarize if you're a researcher. It is not good for whatever field you are contributing to. Now, Daniel Tweed writes, is Dan Elton saying that the markers for aging are not well standardized enough to declare it a disease? What do you think about that comment, Dan?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Sorry. I'm gonna switch over to my phone in a bit because I gotta go somewhere. But yeah, I saw the comment, and that's not exactly what I was saying. What I was saying was that there needs to be consensus. It is similar, but there needs to be consensus. And it's a little bit. I don't want to split hairs, but it's a little bit. Declaring aging as a disease is a little bit different than declaring a biomarker of aging. So I think practically speaking, what we need is we just need a pathway. It doesn't matter if they're saying it's a disease or if they're just saying it's a biomarker. But we need a pathway. That's the key. And they approve. FDA uses biomarkers for approval all the time, especially in cancer. Like you can get a drug approved that just shrinks where they just measure a biomarker like the size of tumors. Like you can get a drug approved on a biomarker or surrogate endpoint, like that it shrinks the size of tumors. It doesn't cure the tumors or the cancer, but it shrinks the size. Or you can get a drug approved to lower cholesterol, right? It's just a biomarker. It's not curing a disease or anything, but it's changing a biomarker. So what we need, practically speaking, is just consensus and buy-in and authorization from the FDA that we can use a biomarker. People have been looking at the problem is the lack of consensus. So people have been looking at epigenetic clocks. But there's a lot of controversy about those. There's a lot of variation between them. People aren't really, they don't necessarily predict all-cause mortality and longevity as good as we would like. You can also look at imaging biomarkers. which I actually think that imaging, like analyzing a CT scan or an MRI scan, can actually predict your longevity better than an epigenetic clock. But then there's some issues with that where, it would have to be standardized and everything. So there's just a lack of consensus. That's why I think they've been holding the Biomarkers of Aging conference the last 2 years, was to try to get some consensus. I think getting consensus in the scientific community is an important step to getting the FDA to accept something. Ideally, the FDA would have their own team working on this, and we'd already have like multiple different pathways. But in the absence of that, we need the scientific community to kind of come up with something and kind of just hand it to the FDA. Yeah. So basically what I was saying was essentially, it's not standardized. So yeah. But it's independent of declaring it a disease. It doesn't, just because there's a biomarker doesn't mean it's a disease. I mean, disease is a little bit step further, which I think is important. Aubrey doesn't think it's as that important, but I think it is important from a cultural point of view, right? To understand that this is not just like something we should accept as normal or as the status quo. This is a problem, right? So I think it would probably be a hint, and there's an expression that like culture flows from the top, right? So I think it would be important from a cultural point of view to set the narrative, set the frame for how we think about aging.
Yes, absolutely. And that cultural shift will catalyze a lot of funding. It will catalyze a lot of research. And we have also made the argument before for years that if even one country declares aging to be a disease, many other countries will follow suit. There will be a domino effect. And that will be quite powerful. Maybe the US will not be the first country to declare aging a disease. Maybe some country like Javier Milei's Argentina will declare aging as a disease, because we do know from our friend Jose Cordero, who taught Javier Milei, that Milei is sympathetic to the fight against aging, and he may be a closet immortalist even. So in that case, if Milei can get a bit of a respite in fighting the economic problems of Argentina, and he could focus on declaring aging a disease, that could also meet his goals of achieving an economic recovery, because that would lead to a lot of cutting-edge longevity research flowing into Argentina, provided that the scientists and entrepreneurs can have some confidence in a reasonable degree of stability of that open situation. Now, also, we have a comment by Alan who mentions that Ben stated that we want to go upstream to the root cause, and that is the best way. And Zach has also said that. Daniel Tweed provided an interesting quotation from Henry David Thoreau: "For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there's one striking at the root." And indeed, the approach of seeking to reverse aging is striking at the root of all of these chronic diseases that people get later in life, because at the cellular and molecular level, their bodies are just so much more vulnerable to those conditions, orders of magnitude more vulnerable to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and dementia as well. And Mike Lazine comments about Zach's remarks. Zach is right on the money. We need incentives to make drugs that actually help people instead of placebos or drugs that do not fix people's health problems. So thank you very much for those comments. And Alan also pointed out with regard to gain of function research, which has been exceptionally controversial and I would say quite ill-conceived. It has damaged the reputation of science, unfortunately, in the eyes of many members of the public. But Alan points out gain of research labs are a lot like black sites in foreign countries. Laws prohibit US government institutions from doing these things on US soil, not from doing them at all. And I would support, and the Transhumanist Party would support as well via its platform, a more thoroughgoing ban on gain of function research. We have in our platform Article 3, which Section 3, Article 6, Section 3, which states that although the vast majority of technologies are beneficial, some of them are not, and intentionally engineering viruses is one example of a harmful technology. But I would be open to any further feedback, comments, discussion on what has been said thus far. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I just really don't have anything further at the very moment. I'm really enjoying all the insights here. I feel like as the longevity director, I just barely keep up on the headlines. So it's good to have these 2 hours of focused discussion here. But thank you for asking, Gennady.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And it has been a fascinating discussion. We've continued to try to connect Alex so far. No success, unfortunately, but more interesting comments. So with regard to Dan's remarks, Mike says, good points. Dan, Christians don't consider aging as normal, so why should atheists, agnostics, or non-religious people? And I think we are all facing the same predicament, irrespective of our theological views or lack thereof. Aging is a problem here. It's a problem in this world.
Gennady, if I might just
Yes.
respond, I think that Christians do think that aging is normal, but they think that it's essentially due to the devil and the fact that from Adam's original sin, the devil now rules over the world, and therefore we have disease and death and everything else. But it is interesting, actually, that there was Methuselah and some of these random other people in the Old Testament that were living much, much longer. I think Methuselah lived 700 years, so that is kind of interesting that that possibility is in the Bible. But yeah. Anyway, but I think that we get pushback from all religious groups and the non-religious about equally. That's my impression.
Yes. My impression is the pushback is more a matter of temperament than a matter of the specific ideology of the person giving the pushback. People with more status quo bias, people who can't imagine, for whatever reason, the future being dramatically different from the past, or don't realize that the past has in many ways been dramatically different from the present, are the ones who are most likely to not give any credence to transhumanism or even to oppose us. But indeed, it's interesting that in the book of Genesis, there is mention of a lot of ancestors to today's humans who lived a lot longer. And actually, my understanding is Methuselah is thought by that theological account to have lived for 969 years. And I bring that up to Christian critics of radical life extension. If Methuselah could do it, if a lot of these biblical figures could do it, why would it be wrong for humans today to live past 120? And usually they don't have a good answer to that commentary. Now, do I think Methuselah actually lived to be 969? No, I think it's an embellishment. I think over time, just like with, say, the ancient Greek heroes, they may have been real people, but their deeds were embellished with each generation of oral storytellers. So probably Methuselah's lifespan got inflated, and he probably existed, was a really old, wise, great individual, but I don't think any of our ancestors lived to be 969 years. But if Christians believe that, it should lead them to seriously ponder, what reason is there to oppose life extension here and now? Now, Daniel also writes, if people were naturally immortal, death would certainly be a disease. So that's also something to think about. Now, on the subject of biomarkers, Bill Anders has made the point that back when Betty White was alive, and she was, say, 99 years old, if she were to walk out on stage and look like a 25-year-old, people would say aging has been reversed. They wouldn't need a specific biomarker. I do wonder if there's some sort of way to approach it from a general phenotype. The fact is, with a difference of, in most cases, about plus or minus 5 years, in the edge cases, maybe plus or minus 15 years, we can tell how old a person is by looking at them. So even, say, Brian Johnson does not look like he's 25, no matter how hard he tries. Some people might say, well, he looks like he's 40. He looks like a really fit 40-year-old too. You could look at a 65-year-old who takes really good care of his health, and you could say, this is a really fit, healthy 65-year-old, but he still looks like a 65-year-old, maybe a 55-year-old, but not a 35-year-old. So do we really need some specific biomarkers, or could there be more of a general phenotypic test for aging, at least a range of biological ages? What are people's thoughts about that?
Well, can you hear me, Gennady?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can, Dan.
Well, it's funny you brought that up, because one of the things that was talked about in one of the talks at the conference was just looking at pictures of the face, and I talked about that during the salon. But I think there's always a question of whether this is really getting at the aging biology. I think people liked the epigenetic markers because it ties into the epigenetic theory of aging, and it's believed to be a direct measure of the disorder of the epigenome and the loss of function of the sirtuins, which, according to David Sinclair and others, is a key driver of aging. So people are looking for something that not only predicts mortality or lifespan, but also mechanistically is tying into the biology of aging. But I think that what, practically speaking, you could probably just use an image that's analyzed by machine learning to predict your age, and then the difference of the machine learning prediction and your actual age would be your quote, would be essentially a measure of your aging, right? So someone that looks 90 according to the AI but is actually 70, their aging is accelerated, right? So I think that is a viable path forward. There's just, like I said, a lack of consensus about, because there's many ways you can do it. You can also look at walking speed, walking distance, things like that.
Yes, indeed. And all of these, I would say, are promising avenues to explore some sort of facial recognition test, along with some tests of physical performance, perhaps, some sort of test of common sense indicators, let's say. But go ahead, Dan.
And the problem potentially with just looking at the face or physical appearance is that it may only be capturing certain aspects of aging, right? And so it may be what we need is a combination of different biomarkers, physical appearance, epigenetics, and blood. Blood biomarkers is another hot area. So, and proteomics is another hot thing. So it may be a combination, but I worry that the FDA may not like something that's super complicated, even if that is scientifically the best solution.
Okay, so earlier we were talking about things that were upstream or downstream of other things. There was one guy named Daniel Lewis who was on Reddit a little while ago. He made a post. He attained the top spot in Brian Johnson's Rejuvenation Olympics. I read through a long series of comments on his post by one guy going by King Pub Crisps, which is an interesting brand of chip he actually convinced me to buy when I talked to him recently. But and Daniel Lewis about the aging process. And one quote from Daniel Lewis kind of stuck out at me. This King Pub Crisps guy was saying, look, I have a PhD in this field. I'm telling you that these epigenetic clocks that you think are so hot and good aren't really that useful for determining biological age. But he didn't really go into the nitty-gritty of why. Now, this Daniel Lewis was a lawyer, and his response to it, he had very good responses to everybody's criticisms, and there was saying, oh, you know, epigenetic clocks don't work. But he said this, he said, if epigenetic changes are causal in aging, then you would expect an improvement in epigenetic age to lead to an improvement in metabolomic status, since metabolomics is downstream of proteomics, which is downstream of transcriptomics, which is downstream of epigenetics. That is exactly what happened in my case. I confirmed improvement in my metabolomic status with the IOLO test, a 3-year reduction in metabolomic age. And I believe that's one that measures the biological age of organs. So it was interesting hearing this guy saying, look, the reason we picked this biomarker is because it's so far upstream of all these other changes that we know are causal in aging. I also wanted to push back a little bit on something Gennady said about knowing people's age so much just by being able to look at them. I would bring the example, the counter example of Chen Chuanduo, who is a Singaporean, or let's see, Chuando Chen. You would kind of say it with this English here. So I just dropped a link in the chat here. Maybe Gennady could drop it in the YouTube. Is a 55-year-old, doesn't look 55. We're not talking a difference with aging here of like plus or minus 15 years. This is like a difference of plus or minus like 30 years. Like this guy is, he's a handsome guy. He looks really good for being 55. So I think, you know, there is still that room. And I mean, although our max age is kind of set, there is still some room for saying, if I'm perfect and do absolutely everything right with aging, I can achieve maximum results. And I'm sure there's some genetic issues that have led to this gentleman being so astoundingly young looking for being 55. But at the same time, we got to say it's not just genetics. This guy's doing some stuff right. You know, this isn't like Dave Pascoe that it looks healthy and young for being, I think he's 60 something. But this guy actually, I don't know. You guys tell me. Gennady just dropped the link. I'll pause here, but take a look at that guy. Doesn't he look a lot younger than 55? I'll stop there.
I think he definitely looks younger than somebody in his 50s could be expected to look. But one aspect that I think may be a confounding variable, people of Asian backgrounds generally look consistently young to much later ages than people of Caucasian backgrounds. Like into their 40s, they might look
I'll give
similar
you
to how
that.
they
I'll
look
give you
like
that.
in their 20s. So if he's in his 50s and he did an exceptionally good job at maintaining his health, he might look like somebody in their 40s of Asian background, except somebody in their 40s of Asian background would look similar to somebody in their, say, late 20s of Asian background. So we, Western observers, think he looks like in his late 20s. But there has also been a study recently, and I'll try to find the link about this, suggesting that aging happens in a kind of punctuated fashion too, that people experience two major episodes in their lives of significant aging, one around the age of 44 and another around the age of 60. And we can kind of see that intuitively. When we look out at people, we can't generally pinpoint their exact ages, but we could say, well, this is a 20-something, this is a 30-something. But for people below their mid-40s, sometimes we might make mistakes about what their ages are. But there's a clear kind of youthful phenotype or kind of younger adult phenotype. There's a clear middle-aged but not quite old phenotype. And then there's a clear like senior citizen phenotype. And with some variation, again, it could be as high as 15 years, especially for people who either take very good care of their health or have really terrible health habits. We can generally identify people within those three groups. So does something happen around a person's mid-40s? Does something happen around a person's early 60s that triggers a cascade of deleterious changes? That's also very interesting to explore. And if somebody is able to prevent that or delay that, so say somebody like Liz Parrish probably never experienced that mid-40s transition, as far as I can tell. And there are a few other women like that in their 50s. Maybe Dave Pascoe, who looks really good for someone in his early 60s. He never experienced that sort of 60s transition. I would say he looks like someone in his early 40s, especially because of his running fitness, which is excellent. I think that has contributed to that outcome as well. But I also think there's a lot that isn't known yet about the extent to which lifestyle can contribute to it. But my hypothesis is we need medical rejuvenation treatments to really push beyond what has been achieved by the most exceptional people today.
Yeah, Gennady, I just wanted to mention, it's really interesting you mentioned age 40, because if you remember the biomarkers of the aging biomarkers info website, we see an inflection point around age 40. So I just wanted to mention that. It's very interesting. And I thought the points that Zach made were also very interesting. I think, yeah, on an individual basis, sometimes another argument for the epigenetic clocks is that they seem responsive to some of the therapies we're interested in. So there's this, they seem to be very sensitive to a lot of things. And there's a lot of, well, they don't necessarily predict mortality as good as some of the other things. They seem to be sensitive to some of the interventions. So that's just another argument I heard. But good discussion, guys. It's really interesting stuff.
Yes, indeed. I think we have had an excellent discussion, and I would like to second Alan Crowley's remarks and also thank him for his generous support. Alan says that he's looking forward to Alex Afshar getting connected next time, but he did inspire some excellent conversation, and also for those who are interested in the study, here's a link from Stanford University to an article that is entitled Massive Biomolecular Shifts Occur in Our 40s and 60s, Stanford medicine researchers find. That is the article that essentially started the discussion of this in the media, and it has become a really well-known research finding in the ensuing months. And I do think it is consistent with our intuitions. And once one has passed into those two phenotypes, the middle-age phenotype and then let's say the senior citizen phenotype, right now it's really hard to go back. And what I'm hoping is that medical science will find ways to go back. Now, we have 5 minutes left in our salon. Ben has a personal story that he would like to share, so please go ahead.
Along these lines of hitting like this level at age 40 and age 60, where you age quite a bit. I do remember my uncle, boy, probably like 20 years ago or something, said something like after age 35 that he just started feeling like he started aging. And I've kind of kept that in mind of like, I don't want to hit that age where I'm like, oh, there I go, you know? And at almost age 48, I think I'm doing pretty darn good. I can't think that I've hit a level like that. I admit I did go for a run yesterday, and it had probably been 5 months or something, and it was harder than I have been doing other cardio, but running was a little bit harder. So another story about my uncle, though. So he has a quite debilitating disease, and there's been times when we thought he's not going to make it the year. And medical advances keep coming along that extend his life so much further that he keeps around. He's kind of like a personal longevity escape velocity kind of situation. So that's all. Thank you.
Yes, that's great that he is benefiting from these advances. And I think it's crucial to note, first of all, one's phenotype does not necessarily affect one's physical fitness or ability to achieve certain goals. I know a lot of 60-year-old and even some 70-year-old runners who are as fast as I am. And I know even some runners in their early 80s who go out there and run 9-minute miles still. So their phenotypes are not those of people in their 30s, but they go out there and they perform well. And it's possible for anybody to undertake activities that improve their health. And another lesson is you don't even have to be perfectly healthy in order to survive, in order to live longer. You just have to avoid extreme acute adverse events for which medical science does not have a solution. And if you can kind of stay within that range of outcomes where either your body maintains you or medical science can help to maintain you, then you can go on to the next stage of the game, so to speak. And that's really the objective. The objective is to stay alive, make it to the next stage of the game. Aging reversal would help you with greater resilience, certainly, and it would give you more time. But even without age reversal, there are things you can do to stay alive, and there are things medical science can do to help you stay alive. And actually, that's an aspect of the don't die philosophy that Brian Johnson advocates that resonates with me, because that's a thought that you can carry forward no matter what your chronological age or your biological age. That is, don't die. Find every way possible to stay alive. And of course, advocate for advances, because that's absolutely crucial to save all of us in time. We all have this disease called aging. We're at various stages along the progression of that disease, and we need medical science to help us, and we need every possible tool in the arsenal to help us. We need researchers directed toward these goals, and we need the FDA to recognize that these are valid avenues of research. So unfortunately, we did not have Alex being able to join us today, but he did inspire this wonderful conversation, and we wish him and Age Reversal Unity all the best in their citizen petition. Sign that petition, sign the petition for NYLAR, and I hope that we can all live long and prosper.